Thanks, Mike. Tom. So we know that everybody in the room pretty much are practitioners. So we didn't want you to walk away from getting information, research, a lot of the presentations that have been made in the last couple of days, and what do I do with this information? How can I use it? I know when I go to a conference and I hear a lot of information over a couple of days, and I walk away and I say, well, what am I going to do with this? So what I want to do is take a few minutes. Doc Martin and I put together what we thought were some potential applications for the research that we did and for the study that we did, and we'd like to know, what you think about these, or if you have some additional potential ways that you think that these literacies could be incorporated into your work. So the first one we just wanted to point out, we've had speakers over the course of the last couple of days talk about the importance of getting to know your athlete and engaging him or her in the work that you do. And we think that the way we went about this research and study, engaging not only the college level, but folks who had different positions, different titles across different industries, is an example that's a best practice. So many times we create programs, we create services, but we don't ask the athletes. We sit together in our leadership teams and we decide what the content should be. We decide what the objectives should be. We decide how we're going to evaluate our programs or our individual work, and we never ask the athletes themselves. And I think that O'Donnell Foyle gave us a lot of tips about that, and so that was the best practices that we learned. Additionally, talking to the athletes helps to clarify what we think we're trying to accomplish. For example, if you look inside the handout that you have for professional athletes, one of the terms that became clearer to us was the one on business acumen. If you take a look under business development, sport business acumen. When we talked about that within our group and listening to the folks who participated in our study, we found out, or at least I learned, that that could be very different from one sport to the other. I learned that, for example, in golf, the relationship that a golfer has with a sponsor is very different than, let's say, basketball. I learned that when sponsors come into town, they want to play a round of golf with the golfer. It's that opportunity that they get a chance to talk to them, to learn about them as an athlete. The athlete learns about the business, and the sponsor is directly responsible for the financial support of that golfer and or the association. Whereas in basketball, when we talk about, with our athletes' business acumen, we talk about something called basketball-related income, or BRI, where the sponsors or the dollars from sponsors is a part of the total picture. The other parts might be ticket sales, fan interaction, sponsorships, and other elements that make up the business model. So that was one thing that we learned in terms of clarifying terminology and what it might mean differently from one sport to the other. Secondly, and I think we've talked about this the last couple of days, collaborating with other colleagues, collaborating with other departments, even within your organization and in your sport. An example of that I'd like to give is, again, at the professional model, if you look at the mental health literacy, right, and you look at all of the terms, the topics that are included there, and immediately I thought about sports psychologist is a person that most athletes have and work with, and most of us do in our organization. And I wondered, in athlete development, how many of us collaborate with our sports psychologists or team psychologists, whose areas, as you can see here, are directly related to the literacies that we're trying to accomplish. But if we don't have that interaction, that collaboration, and there could be other departments and other examples, I'm sure that you could find that makes sense. Social responsibility, that whole area of literacy that we're trying to develop on our own, as opposed to collaborating with other departments, as an example. Third, and obviously, the information that we've learned here, the literacies, are obviously related to how we develop programming, both as a team and also individually. I talked about including the athletes, but someone, I think it was in our last presentation, also pointed out that our athletes are at different levels of development. So even though we might have the literacies that become topics that can get broken down even further, you still have rookies or first-year athletes who are at different levels. If you look at finance and financial education or literacy, budgeting is a very different process in planning for a person who is the first year in your sport as opposed to a guy who is, or a female who's in the last year of their sport, because they might be thinking about family, they might be thinking about other elements that affect those particular topics. So we thought that's an implication as well in terms of how do we determine at what level athletes need to receive certain or develop certain literacies based on where they are performance-wise and where they are in their particular sport, if that makes sense. And then the last slide, a few others. Informing, next one. Okay, informing administrators and people that we work for about the field. We're trying to grow athlete development as a professional. And when you think about the other professionals that you work with, whether they be physical therapy or sports medicine doctors or whomever, there are models, there are theories, it's considered a profession. And so to help us professionalize what we do as athlete development specialists, we need to have those theories and models and standards and best practices that we take back to our employers that really advocate and show the benefit of our work, what we do, and their return on investment with our athletes. All of us have budgets, mostly, hopefully. We need to justify those budgets. We need to justify our existence. And so this is a standard and a profession that we're looking to grow and develop like any other. Informing the assessment, construction, and evaluation of our current programs. I've said a little bit about that already, but what I haven't mentioned are services and resources. Because everything we do is not always a program. I think someone talked about earlier in another presentation, maybe the one before us, going out and deciding what kind of trainers to bring into the organization. Anytime that we bring someone in to do a program for us, we don't have sort of a standard checklist in what are we really looking for. If we're looking for a therapist, if we're looking for the best trainer in the world, we're still developing on our own individually what should we be looking for. Yes, we know we need someone who can relate to the players. We know that small groups work, but when we're researching, how do we define who we select to do the work that we're looking for? And these literacies will help us to identify when we make those selections, when we identify what the resources are that we're using, it should guide us towards our larger picture in terms of what we're trying to accomplish in the big picture. And finally, I think Tom mentioned already just collaboration. And the point that we thought of here was, in this room at ADS, this is the only opportunity that we're aware of where we have such a diversity of groups that come together. So we have college here, we have national governing boards, might have high school, we have independent contractors, but after we leave the ADS every year and we go back to our own locations, I doubt that we talk to each other anymore. And we're talking about the same athletes, the same development. We're all trying to accomplish the same thing across all these different levels. And so ultimately, these literacies, these competencies should guide our curriculum, our individual work with our players, but also guide how we work together to create a larger model, a continuation for the athlete who starts high school, college, pro, minor league. We have a template now that we think should be very valuable in just instructing a lot of the work that we do. So that said, I know that we're out of time. Are there other potential applications that you guys can think of as you've heard this presentation today, and as we get to questions, I know they'll come back up with me here for questions. Are there other applications that you guys think that you could use these literacies immediately in your work?